You saved my tribe, now I give you my daughter as a wife," spoke the Apache elder.
The sun hung high in the sky, burning fiercely over the endless stretch of the desert. The heat was relentless, and the ground seemed to shimmer under its weight.
Cry. James trudged along the narrow, rocky path, each step heavier than the last. His clothes were torn and dusty, his skin sunburned, and his water supply had run out hours ago. The desert had been unforgiving, and he could feel his strength slipping with every passing hour. But he could not stop. He had to keep moving. Somewhere ahead, he hoped, there would be shelter, water, and safety. Days ago, James had been traveling alone through lands he barely knew, seeking work, adventure, and perhaps a sense of freedom. He had heard stories of the Apache territory, a land of stark beauty but dangerous reputation. Travelers spoke of the tribe's fierce warriors and of outsiders who had lost their lives simply by straying too close. James had no intention of trouble, yet he knew that traveling through this land would be risky. Death. Still, necessity had driven him here. His supplies were dwindling, and his body demanded rest. His hope was simple: find water, food, and perhaps a kind hand in a harsh land. As he climbed a small ridge, his eyes caught a cluster of small huts nestled among a line of trees. A thin plume of smoke rose gently from the center of the village. Relief flooded his body. His steps quickened, but he also slowed instinctively, wary of the people he might encounter. He had heard enough stories to know that first impressions mattered. He could not enter boldly demanding help. Instead, he needed caution, respect, and patience. From a distance, the villagers had noticed him too. They observed silently, their eyes wary but curious. The children, peeking from behind the protective arms of their mothers, whispered to each other in hushed tones. Men and women glanced at one another, noting the stranger's appearance. Dusty, worn, and exhausted, but upright and determined.
The elder, a tall man with deep lines carved into his face from decades of experience, stepped forward.
His eyes were sharp, analyzing the man with careful attention. He had seen travelers before, some friendly, some dangerous, and he knew that a wrong move could cost his people dearly.
James crouched behind a small boulder, observing the village. He noticed the signs of struggle immediately.
Water was scarce. The small well in the center of the village barely had enough to sustain the tribe for a single day. Children carried jugs too heavy for their small arms, and elders rested in the shade, their faces lined with worry.
Livestock roamed nearby, but their ribs showed that food was not abundant. Even from a distance, James felt a pang of compassion.
These people were resilient, surviving in harsh conditions. Yet their struggle was evident in every movement, every expression. Cautiously, James stepped forward, hands raised in a gesture of peace. The villagers tensed, but the elder's eyes softened slightly. There was no hostility, only caution. James knew he had to communicate without words first. He mimicked drinking water from his hands, pointing to his empty canteen. Then he gestured to himself and spoke in clear, simple tones. "Friend, need, water, please." His accent was foreign, but his intentions were clear. The elder stepped closer, assessing his honesty. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he nodded slightly and motioned for James to approach. James approached slowly, each step measured. The villagers did not rush him, but their eyes never left him. He reached the edge of the village, where a small trough of water had been prepared. He drank quickly, the cold liquid soothing the parched dryness of his throat. The children watched him with fascination, their curiosity overcoming their initial shyness. James smiled gently at them, careful not to frighten them. Breaths. "All right, good," he murmured, patting one child lightly on the shoulder. The child giggled softly, a sound that seemed to bring a small spark of life to the weary village. Breath. he glances around in despair. As James rested, he began to observe the people more closely. He noticed the patterns of their daily lives, the way the women carried baskets filled with roots and grains, the way the men checked their bows and tended to their livestock, the way children played with simple toys carved from wood. Despite the hardships, there was a sense of rhythm and community, a harmony with the land that James had never truly experienced before. He felt a growing admiration for these people who had carved a life from such harsh surroundings. By evening, James had gained the trust of a few villagers. They offered him food, a small portion of corn and dried meat, but it was enough to restore his strength. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, mindful of their generosity. He also began to communicate in gestures and simple words, learning small pieces of their language. The elder observed quietly, as did the other adults. James's respect for their customs, his humility and his willingness to understand impressed them. Though he was a stranger, there was an honesty in his actions that could not be ignored. Night fell over the village, and the desert air cooled. James sat near a small fire, feeling the warmth against the chill of the night. Around him, the village settled into rest. He listened to the sounds, the soft murmur of voices, the occasional laughter of children, the distant howl of a coyote.
He realized that though he had been wandering alone for so long, he no longer felt isolated.
There was a sense of connection forming. Fragile yet powerful, he knew that he had stepped into a world very different from his own, but one in which he could belong if he approached it with respect and understanding. The elder eventually came to sit near James, a quiet presence that spoke of wisdom and observation. They did not need words at first. A shared understanding passed between them. The elder had seen James's perseverance, his careful respect for the tribe, and his willingness to help without asking for reward. He had also noticed the subtle ways James had observed the village, learning without intruding. This stranger, though foreign, carried a spirit that resonated with the values of the tribe: courage, humility, and honor. James realized that his journey had taken an unexpected turn. What had started as a struggle for survival had led him to a people whose lives were intertwined with the land in ways he had never understood. But he felt gratitude, not just for the water and food, but for the opportunity to witness their lives, their courage, and their community. The village, in turn, began to see him not merely as a traveler, but as a man of integrity who respected their ways and sought to live in harmony rather than take advantage.
By the end of the night, James felt a deep sense of belonging he had never known.
The desert had tested him, pushed him to the edge of his strength, and guided him to a place where he could find safety, friendship, and perhaps purpose. The fire crackled, casting shadows across the faces of the villagers who slept nearby. James looked at the stars above, thinking of the journey ahead, the challenges yet to come, and the possibilities that lay within this unexpected chapter of his life. He knew that this encounter with the Apache village would mark the beginning of something far greater than mere survival. It would be a journey of trust, courage, and human connection that would change his life forever. The following morning, the village awoke to the soft light of dawn spilling across the desert. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of sand and dry earth. Birds stirred, and children slowly began to emerge from their small huts, rubbing sleep from their eyes. James had slept near the fire, feeling the comfort of warmth and safety for the first time in days. He stretched his arms and watched the village come to life, noticing how every movement, no matter how small, had a purpose. The women prepared food and cleaned utensils, while the men tended to their small herds of goats and horses, carefully examining the animals for signs of illness or injury.
The rhythm of life was steady, yet James sensed an undercurrent of worry, something invisible yet palpable.
That sense of unease became reality later in the morning. A scout riding quickly toward the village on a nimble horse arrived with a look of alarm. James saw him dismount, his breath heavy from urgency. The elder approached immediately, listening carefully to the scout's words.
A rival group, known for raiding nearby settlements, was heading toward the village. They had already attacked smaller camps along the outskirts and were likely drawn by the promise of food, livestock, and supplies.
The elder's face tightened with concern, his eyes scanning the horizon.
For years, the tribe had defended their home with courage and strategy, but this group was relentless, and their numbers were larger than the village could easily repel.
Panic stirred among the villagers. Mothers gathered their children, placing them in the huts and holding them close. Men sharpened spears and checked bows, while others gathered arrows, knives, and whatever tools could serve as weapons. Fear mixed with determination, and the village became a flurry of purposeful movement. James, observing the scene, realized that the people were skilled and experienced, yet he could sense their concern. They were outnumbered, and the danger was real. Though he was still a stranger, he could not stand idly by. He knew that action, however risky, might make the difference between safety and disaster.
James approached the elder, bowing his head slightly in respect.
"I help," he said simply, gesturing toward the horizon where the dust of approaching riders could already be seen. The elder looked at him, reading the sincerity in his face. There was no arrogance, no desire for personal gain, only the instinct to act and protect those in need. After a long pause, the elder nodded, granting silent permission for James to assist. It was a gesture that carried immense weight. The stranger had been accepted not just as a guest, but as a protector. The village prepared for the raiders' arrival. James moved alongside the men, listening carefully as the elder gave instructions. He learned quickly how they would defend the village. Some would create diversions, others would hide and wait for the right moment to strike, and a few, including James, would position themselves at key points to block the attackers from entering the village directly. He observed how everyone, from the youngest able-bodied men to the oldest warriors, understood their role. There was no hesitation. Years of experience had honed their instincts. Yet, despite their skill, the danger remained significant. As the sun climbed higher, the sound of hooves became audible in the distance. Dust rose in the horizon, forming a moving cloud that heralded the arrival of the raiders. They rode with confidence, shouting, and their intentions were clear. James's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. He took a deep breath and focused on the task at hand. But courage meant acting despite fear. He could not allow himself to falter when so many lives depended on every decision made in the next moments. The first wave of raiders entered the village perimeter. Women and children retreated to the safety of the huts, while men, including James, took their positions behind rocks, trees, and low walls. The raiders began to shout and threaten, attempting to scare the villagers, but James noticed that their confidence faltered slightly as they saw the determined faces ready to defend their home. James remembered his training from earlier travels, the use of terrain, the importance of surprise, and the need to stay calm under pressure. He adjusted his stance, ready to act at the right moment. Ahead, James, when the raiders made their first move toward the livestock, James acted instinctively. He grabbed a heavy wooden staff, positioning himself in the path of a charging raider. The attacker was momentarily surprised by the stranger's presence, and James used that hesitation to push him off balance. Another villager joined him, and together they forced the raider back. The villagers began to rally, their courage bolstered by the fact that someone outside their tribe, a stranger, had risked himself for them without hesitation. James's presence became a symbol of unity, a reminder that courage could inspire others even in desperate times. The battle was not long but intense. James moved with careful precision, using the cover of rocks and trees to shield himself while guiding and assisting the villagers. Arrows flew overhead, and the sounds of shouted commands echoed through the village. Yet, despite the chaos, James remained calm, focusing on protecting the most vulnerable: women, children, and elders. At one point, he saw a raider attempting to strike a child hiding behind a low wall.
Without thinking, James charged, striking the raider's arm with his staff and forcing him to retreat.
The child looked at him with wide eyes, a mixture of fear and awe, and James felt a deep sense of responsibility. Every life saved mattered, and every act of bravery counted. Slowly, the raiders began to retreat. Their numbers, though greater, could not overcome the determination and skill of the villagers, bolstered by James's quick thinking. The elder stepped forward, signaling the remaining villagers to secure the area. James helped gather the injured and checked that no one was left behind. Though exhausted and battered, the villagers' faces showed relief and gratitude. They had survived, and their homes and families were safe. James, too, felt a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. He had acted not for reward, but because it was the right thing to do.
After the attack, the elder called a council in the center of the village.
The villagers gathered around, tired but attentive, their eyes fixed on the elder and the stranger who had stood beside them. The elder's voice was calm but firm as he recounted the events, emphasizing the bravery and quick thinking that had saved the tribe. When he spoke of James, he described not only the actions, but the character, the courage, humility, and respect that had guided him. James listened quietly, humbled by the words, realizing that he had earned something far more valuable than material reward, the trust and admiration of the people he had come to protect. The children, curious and unafraid now, approached James. They asked questions, pointing at his clothes, his gear, and his hands. James smiled, kneeling to their level, explaining in simple words and gestures what had happened. He could see their fascination turning into admiration, and he knew that the seeds of connection were growing. Even in moments of fear and danger, bonds could be formed, and trust could be built. The village, once wary of the stranger, now saw him as part of their story, part of their survival.
By evening, the village had settled into a cautious peace. Fires burned in small clusters, casting warm light against the desert's cool night air.
James sat beside the elder, both men silent for a time. The elder's expression was unreadable, yet there was a softness in his eyes that spoke volumes. He recognized that this stranger, a man from a distant land with no obligations or family ties here, had acted with courage and selflessness. In that moment, James realized that bravery was not only measured by the actions themselves, but by the intention behind them, the willingness to risk oneself for the sake of others, even when no reward was expected. That night, as James lay near the fire, he reflected on the events of the day. The desert had tested him, but it had also introduced him to a people whose lives were intertwined with courage, honor, and community. But in the villagers, their resilience, their fear, their determination, and he knew that he had found something rare: trust earned in the midst of danger. James understood that his journey was no longer simply about survival. It was about connection, responsibility, and the possibility of becoming part of something larger than himself. The stars shone brightly overhead, untainted by the lights of distant cities. The desert was silent now, save for the soft whispers of wind and the occasional call of an owl. James felt a sense of peace, knowing that the tribe was safe for now. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight was a moment to rest, to honor what had been achieved, and to reflect on the courage that had carried them through the day. The stranger who had entered the village as a weary traveler had, in a single day, become a guardian, a witness, and perhaps even a friend to a people whose lives he had chosen to protect. The morning after the raid, the village awoke in a quiet, reflective mood. The air was still and the desert seemed calmer, as if it had witnessed the events of the previous day and granted the villagers a moment of peace. James had slept near the fire once more, though his rest was lighter than usual. The adrenaline of the battle had not yet fully worn off, and he found himself thinking about the people he had helped, about their faces, their fear, and their resilience. Every life saved had left a mark on him, and he understood that his connection with the tribe had grown deeper than he could have imagined in such a short time. As he walked through the village, he noticed how the people were recovering from the previous day's chaos. Some were tending to minor injuries, while others repaired broken fences and replenished supplies that had been damaged during the raid. Despite the exhaustion, there was a quiet determination in every action. The villagers moved with purpose, not letting fear define them. James felt a profound admiration for their spirit. They had faced danger, yet they had not been defeated. Their strength came not from weapons or numbers alone, but from the unity and trust that bound them together. Inspiration. The elder, who had observed James carefully since his arrival, called him to sit by the central fire. His presence carried the weight of authority, but also a quiet curiosity. James approached with respect, bowing slightly as he took a seat across from the man. The elder's eyes were sharp, scanning James's face, studying him as if measuring his heart and soul. There was a silence that stretched long enough for James to feel the importance of the moment. Words would soon be spoken, but even before that, the gravity of the situation was clear. "Finally!" The elder spoke. His voice was calm, deliberate, and full of authority. "Yesterday," he began, "you risked your life to protect my people. You are a stranger to us, yet you chose courage over fear."
You acted without reward, without promise, only because it was the right thing to do. That is rare.
James listened, humbled, unsure of how to respond. He had acted instinctively, driven by a sense of duty, but to hear it recognized in this way filled him with a mix of pride and humility. The elder continued, his gaze unwavering. "Courage alone is not enough. Inspiration, honor, respect, and humility are needed to live in our land, among our people. You have shown all three." James felt a lump form in his throat. He had never expected recognition, let alone praise from someone whose culture, language, and life experience were so different from his own. Yet here it was. He realized that his actions, small as they may have seemed in the moment, had earned the trust and admiration of people he had barely known. After a pause, the elder rose and walked toward a small hut at the edge of the village. James followed, curious but respectful. The elder returned with a young woman, no more than 20, whose eyes held both curiosity and caution. She had watched James closely since his arrival, her initial wariness tempered by the events of the raid. The elder motioned for James to meet her, and he stepped forward, bowing slightly in greeting. The young woman inclined her head, her expression careful but polite. The elder's voice softened, yet it carried the weight of tradition. "This is my daughter," he said. "She has lived her life among our people, learning our ways, our customs, and the values that guide us. You have saved our tribe. For that, you have earned a bond with us that is rare and sacred. I offer her to you not as a possession, but as a partner, a companion, and a part of our family." James felt a rush of emotions he could hardly name. Shock, gratitude, and humility swirled within him. He understood the magnitude of the offer, the significance of what was being asked. Marriage in this tribe was not merely a personal union. It was a bond that connected families, strengthened communities, and honored shared values. To accept such an offer meant stepping fully into their world, embracing their customs, and committing to a life intertwined with theirs. The young woman, standing quietly, watched James carefully. Her eyes searched his face, looking for sincerity, respect, and honesty. She had seen him in moments of courage and kindness, and she sensed a goodness in him that transcended words. For James, the encounter was equally profound. He realized that the bond he was being offered was built on trust, courage, and mutual respect, not on obligation or fear. It was a chance to become part of a life that was larger than himself, a life shaped by community, honor, and shared purpose. James knelt slightly before the young woman, a gesture of humility and respect.
"I will honor this gift,"
he said slowly, carefully.
I will learn.
I will respect your ways. I will do my best to live with honor among your people. The elder nodded approvingly, sensing the truth in James's words. The young woman's expression softened slightly, a small smile touching her lips. Though cautious, she recognized the sincerity in his voice and the steady determination in his eyes. Over the following days, James began the delicate process of learning the tribe's customs. He observed rituals, listened attentively to stories, and asked questions when he did not understand. The young woman guided him patiently, teaching him the significance of each action, the meaning behind each gesture, and the importance of respect in every interaction. Slowly, a bond of trust began to form between them. He was careful to listen, to honor her guidance, and to act with integrity, knowing that every choice mattered. Breath. The villagers watched this developing relationship with interest and approval. They had witnessed James' courage during the raid, but now they saw his humility and willingness to integrate into their world. Children approached him without fear. Elders nodded in quiet approval, and even the men who had first been cautious of the outsider began to treat him as one of their own. The young woman, once reserved, began to smile more openly, sharing laughter and conversation with James. Their bond grew naturally, rooted in mutual respect, understanding, and shared experiences. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant hills, casting the village in a warm golden light, James and the young woman sat together near the central fire. The elder joined them, speaking of the importance of balance, patience, and trust in all relationships. He spoke of how courage alone could not sustain bonds, how understanding and respect were equally vital. James listened, absorbing every word, knowing that this guidance was both a gift and a responsibility.
As the night deepened, the village settled into a calm rhythm.
The children slept, the fires burned low, and the desert night carried a quiet serenity. Break. James reflected on the events that had brought him here. The journey across the harsh desert, the struggle for survival, the battle that had tested his courage, and the bond he now shared with the tribe. He realized that life had changed in ways he had never anticipated. He had arrived as a weary traveler seeking safety and found instead a community that had embraced him, a purpose that had given his actions meaning, and a connection that promised a future filled with shared experiences and mutual respect. The young woman sitting beside him spoke softly of her hopes, her fears, and her dreams for the future. James listened, understanding that partnership meant more than words. It meant presence, attention, and shared responsibility. They talked of daily life, of small routines, and of the ways they could support one another. In her eyes he saw not only caution, but also the beginnings of trust, and perhaps even friendship. For James, it was a lesson in patience and humility, a reminder that true connection took time, care, and sincerity.
By the time the stars shone brightly overhead, James felt a profound sense of gratitude.
He had been given a gift unlike any he had imagined, a chance to be part of a community that valued courage, honor, and respect above all else. He understood that his actions during the raid had earned him the tribe's trust, but it was his ongoing choices, his humility, and his willingness to learn that would sustain the bond he was forming. The elder's offer was not merely about marriage. It was about acceptance, integration, and the opportunity to live a life guided by principles larger than himself. That night, as James lay near the fire, he reflected on the extraordinary turn his journey had taken. From a desperate traveler wandering through the desert, he had become a protector, a friend, and now potentially a partner in a life he had never imagined. He understood that the path ahead would require effort, patience, and understanding, but he also felt a deep sense of purpose. The stranger who had entered the village seeking water and rest had found instead courage, honor, trust, and connection, a foundation upon which a new life could be built. In the quiet of the desert night, James felt a sense of peace he had never known. The journey was far from over. But for the first time in many months, he felt that he had found a place where he belonged, a community that valued him, and a bond that would guide him toward a life filled with purpose, respect, and shared hope. The elder's words, the young woman's presence, and the village's quiet trust remained with him, shaping his thoughts, actions, and aspirations as he faced the future with newfound courage.
The days that followed were filled with learning, adaptation, and quiet discovery.
James woke each morning to the rising sun, feeling the warmth of the desert light on his face and the sounds of the village stirring around him. Chickens clucked softly, goats bleated in the distance, and the children ran between huts, laughing and playing with wooden toys. The routines of the tribe, once strange and unfamiliar to him, began to take shape in his mind. Each task, each movement carried meaning, and James understood that living among these people required more than courage. It demanded patience, respect, and a willingness to understand a way of life completely different from his own. The elder's daughter continued to guide him with patience and quiet authority. She showed him how to gather water from hidden springs, how to identify plants that could be used for food or medicine, and how to help care for the livestock. James struggled at first, fumbling awkwardly with unfamiliar tools and making mistakes, but the young woman never mocked him. Instead, she corrected him gently, her hands steady and her voice calm. "Observe," she would say, "the land speaks. Listen, and it will guide you." Brace. Slowly, James began to notice the subtle signs. The tracks of animals in the sand, the patterns of the wind, the way certain plants grew near water. With each day, he felt more attuned to the land, more a part of the rhythm of life in the village. He also spent time learning the language of the tribe. At first, it was difficult. The words sounded strange on his tongue, and he often mispronounced them, causing children to giggle softly. But he was determined. He practiced diligently, repeating phrases, asking questions, and listening carefully. Over time, he could hold basic conversations, greet villagers, and understand instructions. Communication, James realized, was more than just words. It was gestures, expressions, and shared understanding. By learning their language, he began to feel truly connected, no longer a mere observer but an active participant in daily life. One morning, James accompanied the men on a hunt to gather food. He carried a bow, still awkward in his hands, while the men moved with grace, skill, and silent coordination. He watched how they read the signs of the land, tracking animals with patience and precision. At first, he missed opportunities to aim correctly, his arrows flying off target. Yet the men did not scold him. They guided him, showed him proper technique, and encouraged him to keep trying. Slowly, he improved, and by the end of the day, he had managed to contribute to the hunt. The pride he felt was immense, not just in himself, but in being accepted as someone capable of helping the tribe in meaningful ways.
Life was not without challenges. James often struggled to understand the customs and unspoken rules of the tribe.
At times, he felt like an outsider, unsure if his actions were correct or respectful. He noticed subtle glances, whispered conversations, and moments when the villagers' expressions shifted slightly. But he also noticed patience, guidance, and kindness extended to him. He learned to pause, to observe before acting, and to always approach situations with humility. Through trial and error, he gradually found his place, earning trust not only through words but through consistent action and thoughtful behavior. The young woman's presence remained a guiding force in James's life. They spent long hours together, sharing tasks and learning from one another. Sometimes they worked silently, their connection deepening through shared effort and understanding. Other times they spoke, exchanging stories of their lives, hopes, and dreams. James shared tales of his travels, the hardships he had endured, and the lessons he had learned along the way. She listened attentively, asking questions, offering insight, and gently teaching him the values of the tribe. Community respect for the land and loyalty to family. Their bond grew quietly but steadily, rooted in mutual respect and shared experiences rather than words alone. James also began to understand the emotional fabric of the tribe. He observed the ways they celebrated victories, mourned losses, and supported one another through hardship. He joined in ceremonies, learning the songs, dances, and rituals that connected the villagers to their ancestors and the land. Each tradition carried meaning, and James felt the depth of history and culture woven into every action. Participating in these ceremonies was not merely symbolic, it was a way of honoring the people, their values, and the bond that now tied him to the village. Children became particularly fond of James. They approached him without hesitation, eager to show him their games, ask questions, and share small victories like catching a fish or spotting a rabbit. James, in turn, took time to teach them, laugh with them, and encourage their curiosity. He realized that trust and connection could be built not only through grand acts of bravery, but through small, consistent gestures of care and attention. In these moments, he felt a sense of belonging that went deeper than words, a sense of being woven into the fabric of the community itself. Over time, James's relationship with the elder's daughter deepened beyond guidance and friendship. They began to share small acts of kindness, helping each other with chores, sharing water from the same container, laughing at minor mistakes, and exchanging quiet smiles. James noticed the warmth in her eyes, a growing comfort in his presence. Likewise, she saw his sincerity, patience, and respect. Trust had blossomed into mutual understanding, and understanding into companionship. They began to anticipate each other's actions, move in harmony while working, and communicate without words using gestures and shared glances. The elder watched these developments carefully. He noticed James's consistent respect for the tribe's values, his willingness to learn, and the genuine care he showed toward his daughter. He also saw the subtle ways the young woman responded, her patience, her willingness to guide, and her growing affection. The elder understood that bonds of this kind could not be forced. They were earned through time, shared experiences, and the demonstration of character. He felt confident that James had proven himself not only capable, but worthy of deeper trust and connection.
James also became aware of his own transformation.
The desert, the tribe, and the daily tasks had changed him. He had learned patience, humility, and the importance of observing before acting. He understood that courage was not only physical but also moral and emotional. The courage to respect another culture, to admit mistakes, and to commit to shared values.
His connection with the land, the people, and the young woman had shifted something within him.
He felt grounded, purposeful, and part of something larger than himself. One evening, after a day of gathering firewood and repairing fences, James and the young woman sat near the fire, watching the sun set behind the distant hills. The sky was painted with deep oranges and purples, and the desert air was cool against their skin. They spoke softly, sharing stories of family, childhood memories, and hopes for the future. James spoke of the journey that had brought him to the village, of the hardships he had endured, and the lessons he had learned along the way. The young woman shared stories of her life, the tribe's history, and the values that guided her people, difference their bond, fostering trust and mutual understanding. As night fell, the village grew quiet, the fires casting long, dancing shadows across the sand. Bright. James reflected on his journey, the struggles, the battles, and the moments of quiet learning. He realized that he had been offered something extraordinary, not just the chance to survive in a harsh land, but to belong, to contribute, and to be part of a community that valued courage, honor, and respect. The bond he was forming with the elder's daughter was no longer just about guidance or duty. It had grown into a genuine connection based on trust, shared experience, and quiet companionship. In the following weeks, James' integration into the tribe became complete. He could perform daily tasks independently, participate in hunts, contribute to ceremonies, and interact confidently with all members of the village. The young woman and he continued to grow closer, their relationship marked by laughter, mutual support, and the shared understanding that true partnership required patience and care. The elder watched this transformation with approval, seeing in James a man who had not only earned his daughter's respect, but had become a valued member of the tribe. James had come to the desert seeking survival, yet he had found something far greater, a purpose, a community, and a bond that promised a life of meaning. The tribe, initially wary of the stranger, now accepted him fully, and the young woman's guidance had blossomed into a genuine connection that neither time nor circumstance could break. In every glance, every shared task, and every small moment of understanding, James realized that he had truly become part of this world. As he lay near the fire that night, listening to the soft breathing of the village around him, James felt a profound sense of peace. The desert, once harsh and unforgiving, had become home. The tribe, once strangers, had become family. And the young woman, once cautious and reserved, had become a companion whose presence enriched every moment of his life. He knew the challenges would come, as they always did, but he felt ready to face them, guided by the principles of courage, respect, and honor that now defined his life. The quiet of the desert night, James understood a simple truth. True connection was not built through fear or obligation, but through trust, patience, and shared experience. But he had earned his place among the tribe, learned their ways, and formed a bond with the elder's daughter that went beyond words. The journey that had brought him here had been long and difficult, but it had led him to a life filled with purpose, community, and the promise of love grounded in respect and understanding. The morning of the ceremony dawned bright and clear, with the sun casting a warm golden light over the desert and the village. James awoke earlier than usual, feeling a mix of excitement, nervousness, and deep gratitude. The journey that had brought him here, from a weary traveler struggling across the harsh desert to a trusted member of the tribe, culminated today in a celebration unlike any he had ever imagined. The village buzzed with activity as men and women prepared for the event, cleaning huts, gathering firewood, arranging food, and setting up decorations made of colorful cloth, feathers, and woven patterns. Every detail carried meaning, every action a symbol of honor and community. James dressed carefully, ensuring that his appearance was respectful and in keeping with the customs he had learned. Responsibility in the quiet moments before the ceremony, recognizing that today was more than a personal milestone. It was a uniting of families, a strengthening of bonds, and a symbol of trust, gratitude, and respect. As he approached the central gathering area, he saw the villagers assembling, their faces bright with anticipation. Children ran ahead, carrying small offerings of flowers and herbs, while elders took their seats near the fire, their expressions solemn yet filled with quiet pride. The young woman, his partner, appeared from her hut, dressed in traditional attire that reflected her heritage and family's pride. She moved with grace, her eyes scanning the gathering for familiar faces and resting briefly on James. When their eyes met, there was a silent understanding, a connection built over weeks of shared learning, challenges, and small victories. They had grown to know each other's strengths and weaknesses, hopes and fears, and today that bond would be celebrated openly before the entire community. The elder, as head of the tribe, stepped forward to begin the ceremony. His voice, calm yet resonant, filled the air, carrying both authority and warmth. He spoke of the history of the tribe, the values that guided them, and the importance of courage, respect, and honor. He recounted James's arrival in the desert, the struggles he had faced, and the bravery he had displayed during the raid that had threatened the village. Each story highlighted not only physical courage but moral strength, the willingness to act with integrity, humility, and selflessness. The villagers listened attentively, nodding in recognition and appreciation of James's deeds. When the elder turned to James and the young woman, he spoke of the significance of their union. "This bond is more than the joining of two people," he said. "It is the joining of lives, the honoring of trust, and the continuation of our community. You have both learned from each other, shared in each other's burdens, and built respect that will guide your life together. Today, you are united not only in heart but in purpose.
The words were powerful, and James felt their weight in his chest.
He realized that this was not merely a ceremony, it was a sacred moment, a living testament to courage, connection, and honor.
The ritual began with offerings to the land and the ancestors. James followed the instructions carefully, placing small items of gratitude at the base of the central fire. The young woman did the same, their movements synchronized in quiet harmony. The villagers chanted softly, the rhythm of their voices creating a sense of unity and continuity with generations past. Profound reverence, recognizing that he was participating in traditions that had been honored for centuries. It was humbling, beautiful, and grounding all at once.
As the ceremony continued, the elder spoke directly to James and the young woman, offering guidance for their life together.
He emphasized the importance of communication, patience, and mutual support.
Breath.
Courage brought you together, he said, but respect, understanding, and shared effort will keep you united. Trust one another, learn from one another, and honor each other's strengths and weaknesses.
This is the foundation of a lasting bond. James nodded solemnly, understanding that the elder's words were both a blessing and a responsibility. The moment of union arrived. James and the young woman faced each other, holding hands, their eyes meeting with unspoken understanding. The elder pronounced them united in partnership, and the villagers erupted in quiet cheers and blessings. Children clapped, elders nodded, and the air seemed to hum with celebration. James felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had not only earned the trust of the tribe, but had formed a partnership grounded in respect, love, and shared experience. It was a culmination of bravery, patience, and humility, and he understood that this moment represented the start of a new chapter, not the end of a journey. The celebrations continued into the afternoon. Food was shared among all, with dishes prepared using ingredients from the land. Corn, beans, roasted meats, and freshly gathered herbs. Villagers exchanged laughter, stories, and blessings. On the next day, offering thanks, smiles, and acknowledgement to those who had guided him and accepted him into their lives. The young woman moved alongside him, their hands occasionally brushing, their connection evident in shared glances and small, quiet gestures. There was a sense of unity, a feeling that the village itself had become a single organism, strengthened by trust, gratitude, and shared joy. Music and dance followed the feast. Villagers played drums and flutes, singing traditional songs that told stories of bravery, survival, and community. James joined the dances awkwardly at first, unsure of the steps and rhythms, but he laughed with the children and followed the guidance of the elders. His efforts were met with encouragement and warmth, and soon he moved with confidence, feeling the rhythm of the tribe and the land flowing through him. The young woman danced beside him, their movements complementary, reflecting the trust and harmony that had grown between them. As evening approached, James and his partner sat near the central fire once more. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the village and painting the sky with deep hues of orange and purple. The elder joined them again, placing a hand on James's shoulder. "You have proven yourself through courage and humility," he said. "You have earned your place in our community, and you have formed a bond with my daughter that is built on respect, understanding, and trust. May your life together honor these values, and may your partnership be a source of strength for the tribe."
James bowed his head, deeply moved by the elder's words. That night, as the village settled into quiet and the fires burned low, James reflected on the journey that had brought him here.
He remembered the exhaustion and fear of the desert, the uncertainty and caution of entering a foreign village, and the chaos of the raid that had tested his courage. He thought of the young woman who had guided him, taught him, and grown to trust him, and he understood the depth of the bond they now shared. He realized that his journey was not merely about survival. It was about connection, purpose, and becoming part of something larger than himself.
James also reflected on the lessons he had learned.
Brash. Courage was necessary but not sufficient. Humility, patience, and respect were equally important. Trust could not be demanded, only earned. Relationships, whether with individuals or communities, required effort, understanding, and shared experience. He understood that his life had been transformed, not by a single heroic act, but by a series of choices, small, consistent, and guided by principle, that had allowed him to earn trust, form bonds, and create a meaningful place for himself in the lives of others. The young woman sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his. They spoke softly, sharing thoughts, dreams, and reflections on the day. She expressed gratitude for his courage and sincerity, and James, in turn, acknowledged the patience and wisdom she had shown in guiding him. Their conversation was simple yet profound, rooted in mutual respect and understanding. It was a moment of connection that transcended words, a silent affirmation of partnership and shared purpose. As the night deepened, the village grew quiet. The desert stretched endlessly around them, a silent witness to the human stories unfolding within its boundaries. James felt a deep sense of peace and fulfillment, knowing that he had not only survived the challenges of the land, but had become an integral part of a community that valued courage, honor, and respect. The bond he shared with the young woman was strong, grounded in shared experience, mutual understanding, and genuine care. In the days that followed, life continued in a rhythm that was both familiar and rich with meaning. James and his partner worked together to support the village, participating in daily tasks, ceremonies, and celebrations. Their partnership became a model for others, demonstrating that trust, courage, and respect could bridge differences and create lasting bonds. The elder observed with pride, as the two worked in harmony, their relationship embodying the values he had always taught: integrity, humility, and commitment to community. James often reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought him here. From a weary traveler seeking water and safety, to a trusted member of the tribe and a partner in life, his transformation had been profound. He had learned that bravery was not only about facing danger, but also about embracing responsibility, understanding others, and acting with integrity. He had discovered that connection, trust, and respect were the true rewards of courage, and that a life lived in harmony with others and with the land was richer than any adventure or treasure he had imagined. The union of James and the elder's daughter became more than a personal milestone. It was a symbol of the bond between communities, the power of courage and integrity, and the strength of human connection. The tribe celebrated not only the marriage, but also the values it represented: unity, respect, and shared purpose. James understood that his life had changed forever, and he embraced this new chapter with gratitude, humility, and hope. As the fire burned low and the desert night enveloped the village, James looked at the stars and felt a profound sense of belonging. He had arrived as a stranger facing hardship and uncertainty, and he had found courage, friendship, and love. The journey had been long and challenging, but it had led to a life filled with meaning, connection, and purpose. In the heart of the desert, surrounded by a community that had become family, James understood that true courage was not just in facing danger. It was in embracing trust, honor, and shared humanity.